Welcome back to Modern Jubilees. Today we're going to be learning Jubilees 8 and 9. This talks about the boundaries that Noah is setting for his 3 children who had begun to fight with each other. So he creates a little lottery and he makes these 3 plots of land. They pick lots, and the northern part gets to be for Japheth, the middle part of the earth for Shem, and the hot areas, the southern part, is for Shem. Now, we had a previous version of this video, and I was unclear when it came to the area of Africa that is part of Shem. It was unclear exactly where the garden was. I only had an approximate. And you, the listeners, you, the commenters, helped so much. This was a crowdsourcing endeavor like no other. I've never seen anything like this. This is an amazing thing. So together, we are working now with a revised map that takes into effect the things that you guys brought up that made a lot of sense. We are only working with the Book of Jubilees here. This is not trying to blend together the piece of Genesis that talks about where the Garden of Eden is. And the reason for that is the description of the Garden of Eden at the very beginning of Genesis, which is the oldest part of the oldest book of the Pentateuch. It's the beginning of Genesis. These are very, very ancient texts. That little piece of few verses are talking about when Eden was created. And so now we know that there was a flood and that things may have changed and that Noah and his sons may have reused the names of the rivers when they perhaps landed in a different place. And so it's not enough to go on for various reasons. So here we are studying Jubilees. Jubilees is an ancient text that dates back to at least 250 or so BCE, and it purports to be from an angel who is with Moses on Mount Sinai. And Moses gets the Pentateuch. He sews together the 5 books of Moses in the time in the desert, and he has this whole revelation with God, and it's this very intense time of communion. But there is also apparently an angel there, and the angel is giving him this book. And this book is the ancient book of Jubilees, best preserved by the Ethiopian Christians, Jews, and people who all use the Ethiopian Bible. All right, we're going to be using chapters 8 and 9, and we're going to use maps. All right, here we are in maps. We're going to do this again, and we're going to see where we went wrong last time and where we weren't sure, and how you helped to solve the mystery and get to the new map that we have. So thank you to everyone who has helped, and let's get right into it. We're in verse 12. According to the writing, Shem's lot was in the middle of the earth for him to take as an inheritance for himself, for his sons, and for the generations for eternity. From the middle of the Rapha mountain range, which are the Ural Mountains. So we're in the middle of the mountain range. So we're in the middle of the earth, right? The north, Russia, is going to be for Japheth, and below it is going to be for Shem. So we're in the middle of the Ural Mountains, which is the Rapha mountain range. From the mouth of the water of the Tina River is the Don River. It's the Tanais, which was the Don. The Tanais in Greek, the Don in English. Don is the 5th longest river in Europe, flowing through Russia. In antiquity, it was the border between Europe and Asia by Greek geographers, and here it divides between Japheth and Shem's lot. His lot goes west through the middle of this river until it approaches the abyss of the water this river comes from, which is here. This is the Don here. And it's going down into the Sea of Azov. This river empties and pours into the Me'at Sea. Me'at is the Meiotis in the Greek and Latin, or the Sea of Azov. This is the smaller sea that the Don River flows into atop the Black Sea, which is above Turkey. I'm reading from the footnotes of the hardcover Jubilees that I highly recommend checking out. It extends until it reaches Karaso, which is within the tongue that looks toward the south. All right, now we're going to talk about where we went wrong and where we're going right now. So the Sea of Azov atop the Black Sea, it's going and it's passing through, you see, in Istanbul. In Istanbul, there's a line that goes through it of the water. And so this is the boundary. Istanbul was Constantinople, a meeting point in the ancient world. And we can see now why Japheth, Shem, and by boat, Ham would have been able to also attend any meetings of the leaders that would have been likely in this meeting point of Constantinople. Noah built a giant ark, and so his descendants would have had great knowledge of boats from then on. So it continues down and gets to the border that is Karaso. Karaso is within the tongue that looks toward the south. And now we have this idea of tongues. A tongue is another way of saying a triangle that is pointing south. Tongues are a big part of this description of these boundaries, and so that's why it's on the cover. So here we're getting to the Rhinocuria. Karaso, the Rhinocuria, associated with Wadi el-Arish, a river valley that fills with water after the rains, emptying into the Mediterranean Sea at el-Arish. This was ancient Egypt's border with the Holy Land, known as the river Nahar of Egypt in Genesis 15:18, or Wadi Nahal of Egypt in Isaiah 27:12. Now, this Wadi from el-Arish actually goes like this and curves upwards. And so, a long time ago, this boundary was made into a straight line so that this plot would also have access to the water. And so this line is an ancient line that is a compromise, essentially, of the Rhinocuria. And so it's nearly identical to saying the Rhinocuria, this line right here. His lot extends along the Great Sea. Okay, now we said the Great Sea. See, here's what happened. Because this was the boundary, it seemed like, hey, this is the boundary. But instead, the marker is simply making sure we're on the right track. We're coming from far away. We're coming from all the way up in the Me'at Sea. Me'at in Hebrew is a little bit. This is the small sea atop the bigger sea of the Black Sea. And if we're going all the way from there and you want to make sure we're on the right track, you might give more than one marker. And so the first marker is Wadi el-Arish, the Rhinocuria Karaso. And then it says, his lot extends along the Great Sea, and that Great Sea would be here the Mediterranean Sea. It continues here. It extends in a straight line until it reaches the west of the tongue that looks toward the south. And now we come up with the next idea. The next idea is that the second tongue that looks towards the south, we know that the first tongue that looks towards the south is the Sinai Peninsula, because it says Karaso is within the tongue that looks toward the south, so that's this one. It's within it. But now we're looking for another tongue. His lot extends along the Great Sea. It extends in a straight line until it reaches the west of the tongue that looks toward the south. I thought it was the Arabian Peninsula at first, but since the Great Sea here is the Mediterranean Sea, if we are to continue above it and look for another tongue that looks towards the south, this would be this. And this here is the Nile Delta. Now, I wanted to understand what the Nile Delta was, and so it took me a while until I found this picture, because on the maps it's unclear, like people live there and yet it's all water, unclear. So here this image really exemplifies what on earth is going on, and the water is flowing into the Mediterranean Sea and it breaks apart into these different rivers. And this forms a triangle, which in the words of Jubilees is a tongue. And so this would be the tongue now that looks towards the south. This sea is called the tongue of the Egyptian Sea. And so that makes a lot of sense for this to be called the tongue of the Egyptian Sea because it's right here in Egypt. And it turns south from there toward the mouth of the Great Sea on the shore of the waters, which would be here. This is the mouth of the Great Sea on the shore of the waters. It extends west to Ofra until it reaches the waters of the Gihon River. So here we're talking about the Nile Delta. And if it extends west, how could it be that it extends west? It extends west to Ofra until it reaches the waters of the Gihon. And so what would this be saying? It's saying, according to this, it's saying basically that the boundary is the westernmost part of the Gihon River. The boundary extends west only until the Gihon River, which is the Nile, specifically the Blue Nile. And that is the one that goes to Ethiopia and not the one that goes all the way south, the White Nile. The White Nile is going to go all the way to Lake Victoria, whereas the Blue Nile, which is really what the Gihon River is associated with, the Blue Nile is here to the northwest of Addis Ababa. It turns south from there toward the mouth of the Great Sea on the shore of the waters. It extends west to Ofra until it reaches the waters of the Gihon, and to the south of the waters of the Gihon to the banks of this river. It extends eastward until it reaches the Garden of Eden to its south. It extends eastward until it reaches the Garden of Eden to its south, from the east of the entire land of Eden and of the whole east. So now we know that it is going east and of the whole east. It turns around and continues until it reaches east of the mountains called Rapha, and so it gets back to the Rephaim Mountains over here. It then descends to the bank of the mouth of the Tina River and goes into the Meotis Sea. This piece came out in the lot for Shem and his sons, that they should have it forever, for all generations. And so this works as another explanation. The first tongue is the Sinai Peninsula. It continues along the Great Sea. It's giving us this marker to make sure we're in the right place. And it gives us another marker. And it says to the west of the next tongue that looks towards the sea, which is where Alexandria is, which is where the major city is. And what is the boundary here? Basically the westernmost part of the Gihon. Then it goes to around the garden. Let's continue. Noah rejoiced that this portion was chosen for Shem and his sons, and he remembered all that his mouth had spoken in prophecy. He had said, "Blessed be God, Lord of Shem, and may God dwell in the tents of Shem." He knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, where God dwells. Mount Sinai is the center of the desert, and Mount Zion is the center of the navel of the earth. And so we're talking about Jerusalem being Mount Zion, Mount Sinai apparently in the westernmost point of Saudi Arabia, and it's going to line up with some Garden of Eden point somewhere in Ethiopia apparently. Now you could say they're facing each other, perhaps they form a triangle, that's what I originally thought, but ultimately if they form a triangle, it doesn't really help us to figure out anything because any 3 points on the map, literally any 3 points on the map will form a triangle. And so it doesn't really work. So facing each other, because we're working with translations of translations, is apparently meaning in a line. That is what we're going to see here. And when did he say, by the way, "Blessed be God, Lord of Shem, and may God dwell in the tents of Shem"? This is after the whole story with Shem, Ham, and Japheth. After Noah drank wine and he was exposed in his tent, his son Ham saw that he was exposed in his tent, and instead of simply covering him, he went and told his other 2 brothers. That was the big sin. Shem took the initiative. He brought Japheth with him. They took a blanket, walking backwards to cover their father. And when Noah woke up, he blessed Shem and said, "And Canaan will be his servant," meaning Canaan, Ham's son, is going to be a servant to Japheth and Shem. That's from Genesis 9:26-27. But of course, we don't live currently according to these curses necessarily. We are in a process of breaking out of these very ancient curses and stories. There is a way for us to break forward through them into a messianic time for us all. He knew that the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies where God dwells. Mount Sinai is the center of the desert, and Mount Zion is the center of the navel of the earth. Essentially, the belly button of the world is Jerusalem. Mount Sinai is the center of the desert because the desert is also North Africa. And the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies. He blessed the Lord of gods, who had put the word of God in his mouth. He knew that a blessed lot and a blessing had come to Shem and the children of his generations forever. The entire land of Eden, the entire land of the Red Sea, and the entire land of the east, India on the Red Sea and the mountains of it, all the land of Bashan, all the land of Lebanon, the islands of Kaftor, which is important. Kaftor is Crete, and this is where the Philistines came from. The Philistines and the Kaftorites were both Hamites, who had come from the plot of Ham. And Kaftor is supposed to be part of Shem's plot, as is the promised land of the Bible. The mountains of Senir, Amana, and Ashur, Assyria in the north. Also all the land of Elam, Ashur, Bavel, Susa, Media, all the mountains of Ararat, which is where Turkey borders Armenia, current Turkey, and the whole region beyond the sea, which is beyond the mountains of Ashur to the north, a blessed and prosperous land. All that is in it is very good. The second lot was for Ham, beyond the Gihon toward the south to the right of the garden. So now this is important for understanding that the garden must be here, beyond the Gihon toward the south to the right of the garden. And so it works for us to be around here again. Still, it extends toward the south and to all the mountains of fire. So now it's saying it extends here. This is the Mountains of Fire Ridge. And it's saying it extends to it. So that would seem like it actually includes the Horn of Africa in Ham's plot. Whereas it's this triangle that actually belongs to Shem. Everything till the Gihon would belong to Shem. Everything south of the garden, which would include the Horn of Africa, here belongs to Ham. So it extends to all the mountains of fire. It extends further west until it reaches the Sea of Atil, which is the Atlantic, and goes further west until it reaches the Sea of Mizrak, that sea to which all not yet destroyed descends. Mizrak, or Mahuk, we have as 2 options of the translation of this word. It's the sea that if anything falls into it, it perishes, meaning the deeper part of the Atlantic Ocean. Mizrak is that which throws. Mahuk is wiped out or erased. And so while we have the regular Atlantic that you reach, there's also what gets its own term. So we understand that there is a part that is less deep, and then there's a part that it's extremely deep, and that is where all the giant sea creatures live and were placed. It continues north to the borders of Gadir. And Gadir, as we said, is Cadiz, Andalusia, Spain. And so it's this little tip included in Hamzat, which is to this tip right here. It continues to the coast of the sea waters, to the waters of the Great Sea, here in the Mediterranean, until it approaches the Gihon River, Alexandria essentially, or perhaps a bit west of it. It goes along the Gihon until it reaches to the right of the garden. And so because the garden is associated with where the Gihon is, we're looking at the blue Nile, so we're talking about this area here. It goes along the Gihon River until it reaches to the right of the Garden of Eden. This is the land that is Hamzat, that he will keep for himself and the children of his generations forever. And so here we get back to this picture. We went down and we created this space here from the right of the garden. Hamzat continues down to the volcanic ridge and goes up and around Cadiz, Gihon, down until the right of the garden. And so this here works. For Japheth, there is a third lot beyond the Tina River to the north of the exit of its waters. And so this is for people in these areas to get to the bottom of precisely. Beyond the Tina River to the north of the exit of its waters, it extends to the northeast, to the whole region of Gog, which is Russia, and to the country east of it, which would be North America. It extends northward to the north, the entire north of the globe. It extends to the mountains of Kelt to the north and toward the Sea of Mizrach. And the islands of Kelt would be Ireland, all these islands here. Kelt are the Celtic mountains in Ireland. And toward the Sea of Mizrach, which we said is the very deep parts of the Atlantic. It goes on to east of Gadir as far as the region of the waters of the sea, which is here. It extends until it approaches the west of Farah. Charles says this means Africa. I see. Verse 27 is important here. So it goes on to east of Gadir as far as the region of the waters of the sea, and it extends until it approaches the west of Farah. So only through studying chapter 9 really can we understand what this means, and this is talking about these islands here which end up belonging to Tiras, son of Japheth. These islands to the west of Africa, these islands actually belong to Japheth. And this was always so strange that places like the Canary Islands belong to Spain, Mahakesher. What is the connection? But in studying this, we see that actually these islands to the west of Africa do belong to Japheth. And so that's what it means here when it says it extends until it approaches the west of Farah. Charles would appear to be right here that Farah is talking about Africa. It returns towards Aferag. Phrygia. Phrygia is west central Anatolia, modern day Turkey. And it extends to the east to the waters of the Sea of the Me'at. It extends to the region of the Tina River to the northeast. So now we have again the Don River to the northeast. It extends to the region of the Tina River to the northeast until it approaches the boundary of its waters toward the Rafa mountain, and it turns around toward the north. So that is all pretty technical here about the Don River and the Ural Mountains, and it turns around toward the north. We already talked about the far east of the north of the world. Verse 29, this is the land chosen for Japheth and his sons as the lot of his inheritance for him to settle for himself and the children of his generations forever. 5 great islands and a great land in the north. It is cold, and the land of Ham is hot. The land of Shem is neither hot nor cold, as it is a blend of cold and heat. And these 5 great islands, there are different ways to count them, but it's all the islands. The islands belong to Japheth. Now we get to chapter 9. And chapter 9 is more difficult and more challenging to understand. But generally for Japheth and Ham, especially Ham, it's understandable. But when it comes to Shem, it really is quite difficult. And so I'm not going to get into it for Shem. But let's review it to see what it is saying. Ham divided his lot among his sons. The first portion for Cush toward the east. And so here it makes sense that this area here, anything below the garden, the far east of Africa, belongs to Cush. At some point they had an empire that reached up here, but so did the Shemites and the Ethiopian Beta Israel. But the far east will belong to Cush. To the west of him for Mitzrayim, Egypt is here, so to the west for Mitzrayim. To the west of him for Put, and Put is Libya, which is right here. To the west of him for Put. These boundaries really help us to get an idea of where these boundaries are, because it's basically leaving it up to Ham to divide it. It's just saying to the west of him there, to the west of him there. I'm sure in person there was a little bit more instruction, but that's what we have here. To the west of him, toward the west on the sea, for Canaan. And so Canaan was supposed to settle the western part of Africa. Instead, some Canaanites end up settling in Kaftor, which is Crete, and then moving into Gaza at some point. Check out the video on the history of Jews in Gaza to understand more about that often misunderstood land. Shem also divided among his sons the first lot for Elam and his sons to the east. So these Hamites, these Canaanites, did settle in this promised land. However, this land is not supposed to belong to Ham at all, and it's not supposed to belong to Canaan at all. And yet they settle here. And so when God brings the Israelites out of Egypt, he talks to them about all the reasons they need to conquer the land, all the bad things that they are doing, and essentially that they don't belong, and that there is a curse on them that needs to run its course until they are fully kicked out. But I don't mean to imply that today's population of Gaza descends from Philistines. Necessarily, the large majority would appear not to, but we won't get into that here. Check out that video if you're interested in more conversation about that. Highly recommended. So, when it comes to dividing the lot of Shem among his sons, it gets pretty confusing. There's always a possibility of mistranslations. There's always a possibility that we would gain further revelation if we had the original Hebrew, which we still hope to gain access to, because though it is apparently lost, it's very hard for me to believe that it's actually lost because it was discovered through the footnotes of The Living Torah by Aryeh Kaplan, that this text in the original Hebrew was studied by Saadia Gaon in around the year 1000 CE in his big schools of study in Babylon. Babylon was an ancient center for learning of Israelites from the ancient times because the Babylonians in 586 BCE exiled. This is the destruction of the first temple, Solomon's temple. They were exiled to the land of Babylon. And so they began their civilization there. And hence we get the Babylonian Talmud later on. And that is because also when the Romans destroyed the second temple, they exiled the Judeans, the ruling class, including my ancestors, to the land of Babylon. And hence we get that famous song on the rivers of Babylon. Al narot Bavel, sham yashavnu, gam bachinu. We sat and we wept. Bezochrenu et Zion, as we remembered Zion. Ech nashir et shir Adonai al admat nechar. How will we sing the songs of God on a foreign land? So let's get back into it. Shem also divided among his sons the first lot for Elam and his sons to the east of the Tigris River until it approached the east, the whole land of India along the coast of the Red Sea, the waters of the Dodin, all the mountains of Mebri and Elah, all the land of Susa, and everything on the side of Farnak to the Red Sea and the Tina River. For Ashur, the second lot, all the land of Ashur, Nineveh, and to the border of India and ascending along the river. By the way, these borders and these places, everything that is being spoken here is from the perspective of an angel during the time of the Exodus from Egypt. So it is not from the creation of the world. These places, like Nineveh, are places that were known at that time of the Exodus. And the Exodus occurred according to Jubilees, and according to the timeline of events that I made in the back of the book of Jubilees in every edition. Mount Sinai is occurring in the year 1301 BCE, 2459 AM, which is Anno Mundi, from the creation of the world, which is the Hebrew calendar. And in Jubilees, these years are counted by Jubilees, by periods of 50, by weeks of years, which are periods of 7, and by individual years. For more on this, there is a video on what is the Jubilee, and highly recommend checking out the book, which has a detailed introduction and appendix with very helpful charts. Okay, and to the border of India and ascending along the river. For Arpachshad, the third lot, all the land of the region of the Chaldees toward the east of the Euphrates, bordering the Red Sea, all the waters of the desert close to the tongue of the sea that looks toward Egypt, and the land of Lebanon, Sinir, and Amana to the border of the Euphrates. And so the Euphrates now is for sure talking about the Euphrates that we know, because it's during the time of the Exodus. For Aram, the fourth lot, all the land of Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates, to the north of the Chaldees, and this is where Abraham originally came from, Ur Kasdim, to the border of the mountains of Ashur and the land of Ararat. For Lud, the fifth lot, the mountains of Ashur, all that belongs to them until it reaches the Great Sea, until it reaches the east of Ashur, his brothers. Japheth also divided the land of his inheritance. Here, let's learn here. So we had Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. And now we're going to talk about Japheth. Japheth also divided the land of his inheritance among his sons. The first lot for Gomer to the east, from the north side to the river. These are approximates. You're welcome to help refine this, but this is an approximation. These squiggly lines means approximate, and consider it above all of these. For Magog, in the north, all the inner portions of the north until the Sea of Me'at, right here. For Madai's lot for his inheritance, west of his two brothers, to the islands and the coasts of the islands. For Javan, or Yavan in Hebrew, means Greece. For Yavan, the fourth lot, all the islands and the islands that are toward the border with Lud. For Tuval, a fifth lot, between the tongue that approaches the border of Lud's lot to the second tongue. And these tongues are what sticks out, like Italy, for example, to the region beyond the second tongue and to the third tongue. For Meshech, the sixth lot, the whole region beyond the third tongue until it approaches the east of Gadir. For Tiras, the seventh lot, 4 great islands in the middle of the sea, which reach to Ham's lot. And so what it seems like it's saying is that Tiras is the islands west of these landmasses. 4 great islands in the middle of the sea, which reached to Ham's lot. The islands of Kamaturi were appointed for the sons of Arpachshad as his inheritance. Arpachshad is a son of Shem. And these islands, meaning Kaftor or Crete, and of course Cyprus, will belong to Arpachshad as his inheritance. This is how the sons of Noah divided the land to their sons in the presence of their father Noah. He bound them all by an oath that said a curse on anyone who tried to seize a lot that was not his. They all said, Amen, Amen, for themselves and their sons forever, throughout their generations, until the day of judgment, on which the Lord God will judge them with a sword and with fire, for all the wickedness and uncleanness that they committed by filling the earth with transgression, uncleanness, whoredom, and sin. And so this oath that is sworn by the 3 brothers in the presence of Noah, they set an oath that sets a curse on anyone who's trying to take a lot that is not his. And who ends up doing that? Canaan. Canaan ends up settling in the land that is supposed to belong to Arpachshad in the promised land of the Bible and becomes cursed because of it. And what is part of their curse is that they get conquered by the Israelites who are meant to live in only this land. That's not called colonialism. That's called settling the plot that was meant for you. And that brings us to the end of chapter 9. There's so much more to talk about here, but let's leave it there for today. This is chapter 8 and 9 of Jubilees, taking into effect all of the amazing tips that the commenters, you the listeners, have left. It is very, very appreciated. Every like, subscription, comment, it's all appreciated. And I see that there's a true community here of people who are genuinely interested in getting to the bottom of the book of Jubilees and the truth and God's word. And so bless you all for that sincere quest for truth. And may God bless us on the continuation of this journey where we are exploring this amazing text called Jubilees, which, as someone who has studied the original Pentateuch, the Torah in the original Hebrew, and the Tanakh in the original Hebrew, and so many ancient texts in the original Hebrew, to come across this book and realize that this is not just any Apocrypha book. This is not just any pseudepigrapha book. This is a very unique book for so many reasons that I get into in the introduction to Modern Jubilees. For so many reasons, this is a unique text, and I do find it to be amazingly inspired. And until recently, it was believed by the academics to have come from the Middle Ages. Somebody just wrote it in the Middle Ages. It just comes from there. But then only in the 1900s did we discover scraps in the Dead Sea Scrolls from 15 copies of the original Hebrew of the Book of Jubilees. And so we know that it was well known at that time. In around 200 BCE, it was well known already. Fragments from 15 copies were found. And so it was well known. And from continued research, I learned that not only that, but it was studied into the Middle Ages. Saadia Gaon apparently had the original Hebrew and learned it in his school. And so it may not be included in the standardized Bible because it was fairly new that, you know what, I can't get into all this right now. It's too much regarding the calendar. But there are reasons why I believe it could have not been included in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. But that doesn't take away for me from seeing it as a very holy book and agreeing with all the Ethiopian people that this is a inspired text, and that's why it's in their holy Bibles, and that's why they worked so hard over the generations to preserve this text and copy it by hand and make sure that it was passed down to the future generations. So thank you so much for listening and for participating in this quest for understanding the extraordinary text of the Book of Jubilees. This is Modern Jubilees, and we will see you next time.